Good morning and welcome to the Point. It is Wednesday, July 29th, 2020. Thank you to those of you joining us on the GBN Television Facebook page, Grenada Broadcasting Network's YouTube channel, those of you on the website www.gbn.gd, those of you watching on GBN TV, channel 7, 11 and 20, and the folks listening to Classic 105 and Hot 98. Good morning to each and every one of you. This morning we are joined by Attorney General Darshan Ramdhani. He's our guest this morning, and as can be anticipated, we are speaking about the COVID-19 control bill, which has been creating lots of conversation over the past few days. Good morning, Mr. Ramdhani.
Morning, Blossom, and morning to all of your viewers and persons on the social platforms as well, looking in and who will look in later. Good morning and good day to all of you. Glad to be here. This is an important conversation that we are having. Yes, thank you.
I agree. Thank you very much. So let's get right into it. First, we're going to start with, let's see how we'll start it. We'll start it with the rationale behind the bill. This is one of the things that has created lots of questions from members of the public. What's the rationale behind coming on with the COVID-19 control bill at this time?
Yes, thank you very much. That is an important point that needs to be stated and restated so that all of your viewers, the people of Grenada, can understand this. But I would like to, before I jump straight into that, I would like to set the tone for my contribution here this morning. As you know, the government has started a formal consultation process. This was announced on Sunday of this week. And I view this presentation, this discussion, this interview as part of that consultation process. Yes. And so you can't have a consultation process unless people know what they're consulting on. And it is important on the consultation process for us to give information what this bill is purporting to do. What is the intention of this bill, as you put it? So this is what I need to stress very early in the beginning of this interview, that I am not here defending this bill at all. I need to make that point very, very clear. What I am here doing is to provide information on the contents of this bill, to discuss the intention of the bill, why the policymakers have decided at this time that this was a necessary move to take this bill to Parliament, and why it is also necessary for us to delay it going to Parliament. And so thank you very much. That's a very important start. As you know, the highest lawmaking body in any country is the Parliament of that country. That is where laws originate, in Parliament. When laws are passed in a country, well, let me say it this way. A country has three separate organs that govern a country. You have the judiciary, which are the courts, and the courts will look at legislation and address interpretation and address grievances and provide redress. That's what the function of the courts are. You have the Parliament, which is to make laws, provide for the laws that will regulate conduct in society, to protect the members of society. That's what Parliament, the primary function of Parliament, is to pass laws to provide for the orderly functioning of a society. And then you have the executive branch of government, and the executive branch of government is the cabinet, and together with all of the machinery of government, the public service, which manages those laws and to provide for the welfare of a country. Now, oftentimes, the line of demarcation between Parliament and the executive can sometimes become blurred, because it is known in law, and it happens everywhere in the democratic world, that Parliament will often give the executive delegated power. In other words, you pass a law and say, in relation to certain things, like you pass a Road Traffic Act, and you put in that Road Traffic Act that it will be up to the minister, responsible for road traffic. And whenever an act says minister, it really means the minister who is functioning in Parliament, in cabinet. Because ministers, when they have responsibility under law, has to take that decision in accordance with the collective will of the cabinet. So it's the entire cabinet deciding, even though one minister is named. So let's say the Road Traffic Act is passed and says a minister will decide where traffic lights are going to be imposed, put on the ground. Yes? Where these traffic lights are going to be. Because Parliament, as they sit there, they don't want to have to decide which street corner, which junction we're going to put a traffic light. And so they create this substantive framework, and then they delegate certain legislative functions to the cabinet or to the minister and say, you will be responsible for deciding, consulting the police commissioner and other stakeholders, deciding where those stoplights are going to be placed, traffic lights are going to be placed in the country. Yes? And so that is where the executive begins to get power. And so where we are currently, we are being governed in this COVID-19 environment by regulations which the cabinet is passing. Yes? Which the cabinet has been enacting. And that is because Parliament passed an act. And the act that Parliament passed was the Emergency Powers Act, Chapter 88 in 1983, I believe. And that act gives the general framework. You know, declarations of emergency begins with the Constitution. Section 17 of the Constitution says that the Governor General may declare a state of emergency. I wish to point out here that Section 62, I don't want to get too technical because I know when you get too technical, sometimes you tend to not make the point as forcefully as you can. But in passing, I want to make the point that when the Governor General is given a general discretion or a general power under the Constitution, Section 62 actually says that if the provision that gives the Governor General this general power does not say that he or she has to exercise an independent judgment, then he or she will act under the direction of cabinet. I think that might be a question you will ask later on, so I'm addressing it now. That the Constitution itself says that whenever any power is given to the Governor General to exercise under this Constitution, unless that provision says that she must exercise it in her sole independent judgment, and Section 17 doesn't say that. Section 17 gives a general power, and that general power must be exercised in accordance with the direction of cabinet. So let's come back. So I was talking for the rationale of why we intended to go to Parliament. Yes, it was because when the declaration is made, it is only then that cabinet was able to get power under the Emergency Powers Act, because the declaration was also made under that act. So it was two aspects that the declaration was grounded in. One was Section 17 of the Constitution, and two, Section 3 of the Emergency Powers Act. Why? Because when the declaration is made under the Constitution, there's nothing that says who is to do what following this declaration. Who gets power to do what when a declaration is made? The Constitution doesn't say when the GG makes a declaration that somebody is authorized to pass some regulation or pass some laws. It doesn't say that at all. So what happens? What happens is set out in the Emergency Powers Act, which is why we also had to go to that act to trigger that act. And when that act was triggered, Section 4 and 5 of that act provides a mechanism that says whenever a declaration is given of a state of emergency, the cabinet will have power to make regulations to govern these things. And if you look at that act, you will see that what is set out in the Emergency Powers Act is exactly what is set out in Section 25 of the proposed bill, declarations of a state of emergency. All those provisions there are presently in law under the Emergency Powers Act, and they have now been triggered since March the 31st. And those powers now repose in cabinet. But cabinet, having been given this power to pass regulations, have been making regulations since March. But you know, Blossom, Miss Alexis, can I call you Blossom?
Yeah, sure, you can.
Thank you. Yes, it's such a wonderful name for the mornings, and I suspect any time of the day. So cabinet has now been given power since March the 31st to pass regulations, which we all know have been interfering, limiting, restricting fundamental rights. We started out with a curfew. We started out with a complete lockdown. And over the period, looking at the medical and scientific evidence, seeing the experience on the ground, listening to the feedback, the cabinet have been listening to the COVID-19 committee, all of the callers, all of the matters we saw on the social media. From all of that, there have been evolution. The regulations have evolved over time. They have been an easing and a relaxation of the regulation to the point there's no curfew today. But when we began this process, and I'm really answering that question, why go to a bill if we are doing this? Yes, why go to a bill is when we began this process, certain stakeholders in the society immediately had said, Why are you telling cabinet? Why are you triggering a power for cabinet, the executive of a government, who is not the primary lawmaking body, to give them that power to make laws? Why don't you go to parliament? Why don't you go to parliament if you're going to restrict fundamental rights and restrict them so significantly? Yes, why don't you do that? But I suspect all of us now realize, most of us realize, that at the time in February and March when this thing came upon us, nobody was prepared for it. We had a pressing urgency back in March that to convene parliament, to get both houses to sit, and at that time people might have wanted to, I don't know if anybody would have wanted to consult or whether they were trying to protect themselves and stay at home. But the policymakers of the country decided, the elected officials decided that it was not, it, it, it was so urgent. Please forgive me, let me switch that off. It was so urgent that we could not wait to go to parliament, and a declaration had to be made immediately, and cabinet had to immediately put regulations in place. And today for today, as we say sometimes, we had to pass the regulations to get a mechanism in place to restrict these fundamental rights, to protect people. The object of it was not to restrict fundamental rights. Let me say that. The object was to protect people. It was to protect health and lives. And so we did not do what would have been the normal first option back in March. The normal first option back in March would have been to go to parliament and let the primary lawmaking body make laws that will affect and restrict your fundamental rights. But here we are. We are now 4 months down the road, right? Things have returned to some degree of normalcy. We're not yet normal back to where we were before COVID, but we are getting to the point where people are so comfortable. Some people say, why do you still have regulations? Well, why we have regulations, we will discuss that shortly, I suspect, about why we have regulations. People will come to that. But the policymakers, the legislative body, decided that it was time that the highest lawmaking body of the land engage in the process of debating publicly these restrictions, these proposed restrictions that were hoping to govern life for the next period. Because when you go to parliament, Blossom, when one goes to parliament, parliament is where parliamentarians will have to stand, and they will have to explain to the public why it is that we're deciding to pass this particular measure, why it is that we're deciding to pass this particular restriction on your right. These elected officials know that they're answerable to the people. When you sit in cabinet and you decide what you're going to pass, nobody hears what you're thinking, and you go out the next day and it becomes law. Every Tuesday you are looking out to see, where did I get the new regulations? When you look at it and you open it, that's when you see what is passed. So you don't get a chance to participate in the debate that takes place in the executive when regulations are passed. But the entire country is engaged in a process when a bill goes to parliament and parliamentarians have to stand up and justify why they're doing it. They know that when they walk out of parliament, having said what they have said, and they go back into their constituency, their constituents will be speaking with them. They know that they have to make sense. When they don't make sense, you know the consequences. We all know the consequences. When your parliamentarians stand and they don't make sense, and they don't make sense for too long, you decide that sometimes it's a time for a change. Yes, but sometimes parliamentarians are also called upon to make hard decisions and hard choices, sometimes immediate. And I suspect this is where we are. We are at a point where perhaps and these conversations are necessary to inform the general public what it is that is contained here. Well, what is contained in this? So let me finish that point. The intention was that it is now time, 4 months down the road, to take the lawmaking power back to Parliament and let Parliament make the decisions on the way forward, so that next month we don't have to have cabinet sitting again and restricting fundamental rights continuously under a state of emergency. And so that's the whole purpose. It is not, let me say this, the government does not need to go to parliament to continue to impose restrictions. The restrictions that are in the regulations are continuing. Well, they will continue as long as the government considers that they are necessary and appropriate to protect health and lives. Yes, so that is ongoing. And when you compare the two documents, the current regulations, and you compare with the bill, you will see that the current regulations are more onerous. They have more restrictions in the present regulations. There is a easing up in the bill. So it is not as though the government is intending to go to parliament to pass more serious restrictions on you than is already existing. The government already has a power, the cabinet already has a power given to them under the state of emergency to pass all those measures to interfere with property rights. They haven't been doing that. They have not been doing that at all.
But Mr. Ramdhani, but if we have, not if, we have the Public Health Act, we also have the Emergency Powers Act. Why do we still need another piece of legislation in these COVIDious times, as currently we still have no active or confirmed cases of the virus since it's been more than a month? We have eased the curfew. Things are, like you said, almost back to normal, except for the wearing of masks and social distancing and so. But if we have these things already in law, why we need further legislation? And piece of legislation which to some of us look like it's trying to take away some of our basic human rights. Why?
I think that is a very, very important question, an important discussion that is ongoing. I've heard that question being posed by many. I have attempted to answer it on different media platforms already. But this is very, very important. And the answer to that is this, that why not use the public health legislation? Now, if you realize, if we look at it carefully, one would realize that the measures that we are able to pass under the Emergency Power Act to restrict fundamental rights, we are only able to restrict fundamental rights because we are coming under an Emergency Powers Act. If you look at the public health laws, there is no substantive provision in the Public Health Act, yes, which says the minister can pass regulations to restrict fundamental rights. Let me repeat that. There is no substantive provision in the Public Health Act. Like in the Emergency Powers Act, it says when a state of emergency is declared, cabinet has a power to do A, B, C, D. And the A, B, C, D are the things which are set out in Section 25 of the bill. That is already in law, yes? So it is only because we have utilized the Emergency Powers Act, we were able to tell people to stay home, to put them under restrictions. We were able to impose physical distancing requirements. We were able to say, your right to freedom of association, you can't exercise it as you did before. Freedom of association is a fundamental right. And here is a government under these regulations telling people no gatherings beyond 50, no gatherings beyond 20, no gatherings beyond 10. Remember, we had this evolution of the numbers, right? And so it is only under an act such as the Emergency Powers Act, which when triggered, it gave the powers substantively. It says when a declaration of emergency is made, cabinet has a power to do these things. And if you look at your Section 25 there, under that bill, you will see the things that were given to cabinet under the Emergency Powers Act. Under the Public Health Act, whilst there are measures that you're able to take to go into people's property, to inspect kitchens, to do certain measures, quite a lot of measures, but they don't go as far as giving, and I'm pointing to this one example. The Public Health Act does not say that a minister may make regulations and limit the number of persons who can gather at Morne Rouge playing field, or who can gather, or whether we can shut down Carnival. Yes, it doesn't give you that power under the Public Health Act. That's my view, right? The other thing, even if I'm wrong about that, because everybody has been expressing views. Darshan Ramdhani, it doesn't have the ultimate say at the end of the day as to what the law is. We will all probably find out what the law when somebody challenges this and we go to court and a judge makes a ruling on the law. But this is how lawyers operate, and lawyers have to have confidence in their opinions when they're honest to themselves. And honesty is not sufficient. You also need to do the research. You also need to read the Constitution that you're speaking about, and you also need to understand the provisions. It's not sufficient to say this Constitution is passed, therefore everything is unlawful. That's not sufficient. You need to open it. You need to open it and you need to look at the provisions and you need to see which are the provisions that make it unconstitutional. So even if I were wrong and that the Public Health Act could allow these regulations to be passed there, I think there's another reason why the Public Health Act should not be used. A big piece of document like this with a lot of regulations, yes, already existing for a long time. If we were to suitably put amendments into that act, and some of them will have to be substantive amendments, meaning go to Parliament, as well as to put regulations, we will have one body of laws, right? One body of laws. Then we'll have to do a document to amend it. We might have to do a second set of regulations to amend it. And so when we're done, we have about 4 pieces of document, one 100 pages long, a next one 17 pages long, a next one 3 pages long. And then you will have to come together. And I tell you, lawyers and judges struggle when they have to look at that batch of papers to put it all together. Amendments in law, sometimes people say you do piecemeal amendments. Every year you do an amendment to something. Every year you amend the provision. So when you're done, you have to sort through 5 years of amendments. And in this period, I asked my drafting department to print out all the documents for me. And I had 27 documents printed that were passed since we started, declarations and regulations. There are 27 of them they printed out. When they sent me the email, this is what we have passed so far. Yes? So the point I'm making here is that as a management measure, imagine you came to GBN every morning for a year. And when you come to GBN every morning, they give you a page and say, this is a rule that you have to follow. And they stick it up on the wall. And tomorrow you come back and they bring a paper and they put it at the bottom of that one, amending that rule slightly. And then the next day they come with a next paper, amending that rule slightly. And sometimes they forget to paste it up. And so I am saying, if you had one single document, one COVID-19 bill, one COVID-19 act, if you realize, Blossom, when we were passing these regulations, even though from week to week we were simply changing sometimes 1 paragraph or 2 paragraphs, the government, the Ministry of Legal Affairs, we printed back the whole act and put in that change. We could have printed one single page and said Section 8 of the regulation is amended and the regulation shall continue for another week. And every week we could have given you a piece of paper. But we didn't do that. We reprinted, republished the entire regulation because we thought it would have been a management nightmare to have to wade through all these documents. You yourself, well, maybe not you, but news reporters, media houses were calling me. All of them have my number. And they were calling me and asking, Mr. Ramdhani, what is the change this week? What is the change? Can I see the document? And can you imagine, when the draft is being done, I have 5-6 emails coming with various amendments in my email box. And then we have to siphon through. We don't have printed copies because we are sitting remotely.
But Mr.
So, I know you want to talk. Go on.
Yeah, but it still doesn't. How I should put it? Okay, let me put it this way. And there's somebody on the WhatsApp that's asking the same question. With the amendment in the Public Health Act, even if it is the Public Health Act has 47 pages and the COVID bill has 13, that's 60 pages. So even if those 13 pages were put into the Public Health Act, it will be the same 60 pages. 2 documents, 1 document is the same amount of pages. But wouldn't an amendment to the Public Health Act possibly cover something like this happening again? Because 2020 we were dealing with COVID, 2021, God forbid, we could be dealing with Ebola, 2022 it could be some other pandemic or the other. So every time a new pandemic comes, we're dealing with a new bill and a new act to go before Parliament, when one Public Health Act could deal with this is what would take place whenever there's a pandemic.
I think that's a very useful analysis, but let me say this, and this is my view on this. Again, it comes back to fundamental rights restrictions. And if you notice, we actually, sometime in April, the minister has a power under the Public Health Act to expand the definition of infectious disease. right? Because when infectious disease is defined in the Public Health Act, it did not include coronavirus. It had all other smallpox and other kind of infectious disease. And the minister caused an order to be passed, which included the coronavirus in the Public Health Act. But the management of infectious disease under the Public Health Act never contemplated powers such as restricting gatherings, curfews, imposing curfews. It does not contemplate that at all. So you could not pass a regulation. You could go and amend it substantively in Parliament and put the power there to make declarations under there, because you have to get to a state of emergency before you can get to a curfew. You can't amend the Public Health Act unless you put this Section 25 that we have in this bill, the Section 25 that says states of declaration can be made. Unless you put that, you cannot ordinarily amend a bill to declare curfews. It's not the normal. A curfew is not the normal. I'm using that as the extreme example. And again, it comes back to that point. Do you want to do that piecemeal kind of regulation to an existing act? Because if we get out of COVID-19 and we have a vaccine, then it can be managed under the Public Health Act. Because the Public Health Act, when these choleras and all these things began initially, there were no vaccines for them. There were no definitive treatments for them. But when they got to that point, they were containable with regular management of a governance structure. And so they were put in a legislation, and that legislation was able to deal with it at a certain level, was able to deal with it. My view is not set in stone. These are consultations. And let me repeat that phrase I used earlier. I am not advancing my position here. I'm explaining what is the thinking that went into this proposal. And that's the thinking. I mean, if the government decide that they want to revisit the Public Health Act, despite the view that it would make for cleaner management, neater management, easier management of a process to have one reference act that you can look to, because this is we are in the middle of an unprecedented situation, and we don't know what is going to happen next. We don't know if those persons who were cured of the coronavirus, whether it will resurge in them. We don't know that. And so this is what we are hoping, that we will be able to have this management structure that will give everyone a clear picture as to what exactly are your rights and obligations and the powers that are given to the government. Let me reduce the sound on this. I think your texts are also heating up. Mine are heating up as well.
Maybe. On that note, Mr. Ramdhani, before you continue, let's just take a very quick break, and then we're going to come back with the discussion. This is to the point we're talking about the COVID-19 bill. I still have some questions for Mr. Ramdhani before I get to the phone lines, but don't worry. We'll deal with that on the next side of the break. We'll be right back.
COVID-19 spreads from person to person through the droplets that are produced when someone coughs or sneezes, which makes it easy to spread between people in close contact. Now let's get prepared to stay healthy. To reduce your chance of catching or spreading COVID-19, practice these simple everyday preventative measures. Droplets can also land on surfaces, so ensure that you wash your hands frequently for a minimum of 20 seconds or sing the happy birthday song twice. Avoid touching your face, especially your eyes, nose, and mouth. If soap and water are not readily available, use an alcohol-based hand sanitizer with an alcohol content between 60 and 90%. 70% is ideal. When you cough or sneeze, cover your nose and mouth with a flexed elbow or a tissue. Dispose of the tissue immediately and then wash your hands. If you notice someone has a fever and cough or other symptoms of respiratory illness, avoid close contact when possible. Let's all do our part to ensure that each and every Grenadian remains healthy. Our health is our collective responsibility.
one day I woke up and, they painted a set of pedestrian crossing all along the streets. Nobody told us how to use that thing properly.
I know how.
You're serious?
Every safe, good driver knows about these things. As a driver, you have to be very attentive. You're coming up close to a pedestrian cross, you start slowing down immediately, looking to see if there's any pedestrian on the side getting ready to cross. If there is, you stop on the line that is a certain distance before the crosswalk. Then you would see the pedestrian put their hands out, looking directly at you, indicating that they are going to cross. And only when you have come to a complete stop, that is when they will quickly and safely cross to the other side. And then you continue happily on your journey.
Stop, look, hand out, eye contact, wait for pedestrian to cross. Then you happily continue on your journey.
This message is brought to you by this group of insurance companies, the Traffic Advisory Body, and the Traffic Department.
Welcome back to The Point. We're speaking with Attorney General Darshan Ramdhani in relation to the COVID-19 control bill, which would not be tabled in Parliament today, but nevertheless, we need to continue the discussion as things move forward with the intention of implementing or taking the act to Parliament. Let me go back to this, Mr. Ramdhani, before I go to the phone lines. Even if a bill like the COVID-19 control bill is needed at this time, there are parts of that bill that seem heavy-handed. There are parts of that bill that not just doesn't sit well with a lot of us, but it seems like things going to get coconeous and they're going to put the blame on the bill. I speak specifically of one of the sections that say police officers don't need a warrant to come into your home and detain you. And then there was another one that was causing disruption. The powers bestowed upon the Minister of Health to put measures in place that he thinks need to be put in place to guard against the spreading of the virus. It just seems to me like a heavy hammer that is being put on 110,000 Grenadians.
I got the first part clearly, but what was the last part?
The last part was about the powers bestowed on the Minister of Health to exert parts of the bill that say he can shut down businesses that do not go along with the protocol and the regulations and so.
Yes. Those are very important points you're making. In fact, last night I was looking back over some of the things that were being said, and I'm trying to pull up something here as we speak. I was looking back over some of the things we said. Yes, sorry. Right, some of the things I said, and this is a consultation process that we're in at the moment, and I am very pleased to say that listening to the feedback that is coming, it seems to me that a recommendation will have to be made in relation to the one dealing with police powers. Let's start there. The police powers relate to a situation believe that instructions and directions or the bill is not being followed, that a police officer may then be able to exercise force to enforce the provisions and those instructions and even enter premises without a warrant. That's how it is framed at the moment. But it seems to me that a recommendation will have to be made based on this feedback that is coming, that many are concerned that even though that might already exist in the regulation and exist in the 1947 Act, and even though I believe it is permissible under the Constitution, from a policy standpoint, it seems to me that a recommendation will be made to say, well, look, you can give the police power. It seems that that's what the public is asking to be done if the policymakers present it in that manner. But the recommendation, it seems, will be made. You can give the police power to enforce the bill, but when it comes to entering someone's house, it seems that sections of the public, the community, are saying that this should only be done with a warrant. And so that is as an amendment that can be a recommendation that can be made, and for the policymakers to take it forward. Yes? Ultimately, I can see that this particular aspect of the bill is causing concern. I can see that. And I am not going to stand here and say, no, we have to keep it that way. This is why I'm saying this morning when I started this process, I am viewing these discussions as part of the consultation process. You can only consult on something when you understand what it is someone is saying. And I'm hoping that by me coming on to these types of programs, I'll be able to explain what currently is being proposed. That's what currently being proposed, but it seems that a recommendation will have to be made that this particular section relating to police powers cannot stand as it is, and warrants may have to be obtained. Yesterday, on the GIS briefing, I had actually given examples. You know, Blossom, currently, under the laws of Grenada, if a police officer is passing a house and you hear someone screaming murder, murder in a house, a police officer, and it comes over that it's literally not somebody singing a song. You hear a commotion, you hear a battering like if somebody's hitting into a wall, and you hear shouts like that. It will give rise to it could give rise to a reasonable suspicion that someone's life is in danger in that house. Right now in Grenada, you standing on the road, and if you see a police officer there, look at the house, and you are looking at the house, and he turns and he tells you, goodness me, I have to go get a warrant and come back. You will ask that policeman if he's mad. You will say to him, please go right now and kick down that person's life. You will tell him that. No, I am not at all again.
That one, no. To me, that's two different situations. Life or death with me screaming bloody murder is different to me sleeping home, and I just did not wear a mask when I went to the shop down the road. To me, that's two different.
Well, I agree with you on that.
Kettles of fish.
Yes, I agree with you with that. That particular section cannot be used in those kind of situations. It's open for abuse, and this is why I think this recommendation is very sensible.
That's the problem.
The situation I was looking at, this was the example that a man has been declared to be infected with the COVID-19 virus, and he's told to stay in his house. Stay in your house, you have the virus. And the next morning he wakes up, he picks up his cell phone and calls 15 persons to come over for a party. The neighbors know he has the coronavirus, and the neighbors pick up the phone and call the police. People are in the house now, and more are going into the house. The police officer, of course, in the world I want to exist in, should be able to go get a judge immediately or a magistrate immediately to give a warrant. But we know sometimes you don't find them. And right now in that house, people are about to contract the coronavirus. The coronavirus has been likened to a weapon of death. Yes? It's like if you have a knife or a gun taking it, and you know, would you send your child or your brother or your sister in that house, and you know that man has the coronavirus, and do you want the police to go for a warrant? Now, I am not saying that is the only example that this section can be used for. I believe there is a lot of sense when people say that one can abuse the section, but one can really right now abuse the quarantine section. The quarantine section that gives the exact same power is there in law. But you don't hear any police officer going into somebody's house to check to see if they're breaching any quarantine laws or whatnot. It's not being abused at all. It's been there since 1947. Look, 4 months. We have had this provision for 4 months in exact terms in the regulation. Have you heard once that a policeman went into somebody's house? Again, I am not defending this provision. I am saying that there is no need for this provision to cause the entire bill to be labeled bad. That's the point I want to make.
But I would agree with you that there would be situations that would, warrant the need for you to go into somebody's house if they are blatantly disregarding the protocols. But like you said, that section of the bill to me leaves room for ambiguity, yes. And yes. Leaves room for it to be abused. That is the problem. But let me move on though, because I need to go to the phone lines. The phone has been ringing for a while. My next, should I call it an issue, is government has announced they would not table the bill today pending consultations. My concern is, what guarantee do I have that if I participate in a consultation in whatever form it takes, that what I am saying would actually make a meaningful difference in the bill? Because to me, it looks like this is the bill. It's set in stone. We're going to tell you we're having consultations. We're going to make you feel like you have a say. But the truth of the matter is we're bringing back the bill just as how it is. That's how I feel based on past experiences with these kinds of situations. So my question is, what guarantee do I have that when I show up at a Zoom meeting or in a community center, that when I tell you you raise that bill, you would actually consider, not the bill, but that section of the bill, that the officials would consider taking it out?
When we came back from the break just now, you should have asked this question first, not the second question, because the first question you just asked, we had a conversation just now, which says that it seems to us that a recommendation will have to be made to the policymakers in relation to the police powers. So right there and then, I would have thought that that is clear evidence that I'm listening.
I wasn't satisfied. I wasn't satisfied.
Well, you see, what evidence or what guarantees do you have when you elect a public official that he will act in your best interest throughout his term? What guarantee do you have that when you say "I do," when you stand at the altar with your spouse to be, to live together for better and for worse till death do us part, that you will not end up in the divorce court? I don't want to make this too light, but I want to say that if we are serious about protecting ourselves, and the responsibility for protecting ourselves does not lie only with the government. You can't turn your back and walk away from the government because you believe the government may have gotten something wrong, when what they're attempting to do is hopefully you must conclude that we need to have some measures going forward, some measures, wherever they are, whether in the Public Health Act, whether separately, whether in regulations or whether in a bill. We need to have something going forward. And if it is law, then I would urge that let us think that it should be the highest lawmaking body in the land making those rules. Let us think that way. So in relation to the consultation process, I think we all need to approach this in good faith. Someone has said that I said that the consultation will have no meaning, but that must be taken out of context. I did not say that. And I want to assure people, as I have said just now, I have come today, and I'm saying today, that it seems to me that we have to redress the powers given to the police. I'm listening to this. The policymakers are already in conversations with me. We are already in conversations. We are already discussing this particular provision in the proposed bill. And so let us engage in good faith. Let us engage in meaningful consultation. Please don't close the door to open dialogue. I am hoping that something good will come out of talking. They say that communication will solve many things, even in the I do situation. Yes? We need to talk. We need to have a conversation, and we are prepared to listen. I already hope that I have demonstrated that by the answer to the first question. I've already started those discussions in relation to the closure of business, which you did not get to hear me speak about. I think also that's a provision that needs to be looked at. It may be that you might want to give the power to close a business that is posing a danger immediately, and when they rectify themselves. So you're not closing them at all. I don't think the intention was to close them by way of a punishment or a penalty. It should be a closure to take care of a risk. Like if you have a restaurant and the restaurant has an infected kitchen, rats are running around. Right now, on the current legislation, there is a power to close certain business. In fact, the Section 30 of the Liquor License Act, Chapter 174, says where there's any riot or tumult happening or expected to happen, the minister may direct every licensed dealer or near the place where the riot is happening or expected to happen to close his or her premises during any time which the minister may direct. Yes, and anyone who continues to open will be guilty of an offense. You have that. And so this concept of a minister being given power to protect and to safeguard the public, and using that power to close businesses already exists in one fashion, at least under the Liquor License Act. That is already there. And you can understand it's not drunken people alone that he's stopping it for. It's simply there's a riot nearby and or expected to happen nearby, and the minister is given power under law to close that business. What I'm saying, to conclude on the answer, is that this provision needs to be looked at. I agree. I agree that that particular provision, I'm going to be making some recommendations. Mr. Bristol has pointed out that section, and I am grateful to him for pointing that out. I think that's an eminently sensible suggestion that we need to consider carefully. And the parameters of any power given to close any business to the executive must be managed in a strict confine to safeguard health and to safeguard life. Yes?
All right. Let's go to the phone lines. First caller. Good morning, caller.
Good morning. How are you?
I'm good.
I want to ask Mr. Ramdhani something. Mr. Ramdhani, are you the chief architect in drafting this piece of thing to take to the parliament? I'm asking you, are you the chief architect in drafting this piece of thing to take to the parliament to get it passed? I want you to answer this question first before I say anything.
No, just go ahead and ask the question.
Are you the Attorney General for Greater Carriacou and Petit Martinique, or are you the Attorney General for Kit Mitchell and the NNP? Listen to me. We have a right to talk on anything which we find is not right. This piece of thing is just curtailing our rights and freedom and privacy. How could you, as Attorney General, as a foreigner coming here, to draft such a piece of thing, to take it to the parliament, to put on our back? You cannot do that in Ghana. If this thing be happening in Ghana, there would be a lot of riot in this country, in Ghana, or Trinidad and Tobago. But you, as far as I'm concerned, your status should have been revoked and sent back to Ghana. Telling you.
Thank you, caller. Mr. Ramdhani.
My answer to that will have to be this. Legislation or bills that are taken to Parliament is not, the policy behind any bill is not at all decided by the Attorney General's chambers. Our duty at the Attorney General's chambers and the Attorney General himself is to present legal advice to the government, is to draft legislation when those policy instructions are given to us. In the normal course of government's business, this is how legislation is formulated. Your government, your elected officials is expected to have a pulse on the society as to what is required to happen. They listen to their constituency from time to time. They listen to, and they make decisions that we need to pass particular laws. There are certain sections of the society that needs protecting, and your public officials decide, your elected officials decide that I want to address this, but to address this requires a law, yes? And so when they have finished doing that, they call their technical persons within the ministry, whichever is involved, and in this particular case, the Ministry of Health will be involved, the Prime Minister's ministry will be involved, Minister of Tourism will be involved, Minister of Education will be involved, because these are all the sectors that are being affected by the COVID-19 arrangement. So all of these various components of government, these various ministries are all together with their permanent secretaries and their technical team, and they're analyzing, the doctors are analyzing what do we need to do. And they formulate a policy and they decide, you know what, we need to impose restrictions. And then they send that policy instructions to the Attorney General's chambers. So when it comes to our chambers, our job is to look at it and to say that what you want to happen can happen in law, but we can't tell them you must not let that happen. If we see that it is illegal, meaning that you can't pass it and it will be consistent with the Constitution, right? If we see that says this provision is conflicting with the Constitution, we must point it out to them and say, because that's our job, and say, listen, this particular provision can't stand the constitutional test. Or we can say to them that it is affecting this fundamental right. Do you want to do that? Yes? And then they will have to make that decision that they want to do that. And so when they get that opportunity, we sit down and we draft. So there's no question that the Attorney General or my chambers and my drafters sit down in the night and come up with this. Anyone who I understand the member of the public who is speaking in relation to him being concerned that one single person sitting down, but that's not why you elected your public officials. You elected your public officials. We all did. I went and I voted. We all did elect our public officials because we expected them to make policy decisions for the good of all of us. We expected that. And so these policy instructions that are represented in this proposed bill are coming from your elected officials. That team of persons are formulating policy. We are guiding them on issues of law and where it is constitutional or not. That's our role in this process. I will not answer the other part of the statements. I will not comment on that at all. I think it's unfortunate that I have to hear that.
I agree. And let's try to be respectful, please, and thank you. While you all may have your feelings on the issue, you can ask your questions, but please be respectful of the program, the listeners, the viewers, and especially the guests. Let's go back to the phone lines. Good morning.
Good morning, citizen. Well, greetings then to your guest. I want to make 3 observations. First, to the Attorney General. Well, all of them, as a matter of fact, I'm sorry. The first. Listen, Mr. Attorney General, I would like you to pay attention to the use of the verbal structure would have plus the past participle. You're a lawyer and you ought to know it cannot be the same if something happened versus what would have happened. Pay attention. You send in the wrong message. 2, my understanding of the verb to consult in the English language is to seek or ask for advice and or information from somebody. It is distinct to the verb impose. You have come with your imposition. You want to shove it down my throat. I refer to the people of this here country. And you calling that consultation. I think you're more confused than a red ant in a black ant's nest. The third is this. You're so confused that you're telling the people that the Public Health Act plus the Emergency Powers Act, and you just mentioned another, the Liquor License Act, gives the government and the executive sufficient authority to do what they have to do according to the laws of this country so that control can be put on the country, at least to bring us where we are. Question, why is it you want to go further to cause that the police may enter people's property and all of that? It must be that you have some ulterior motive. Would you like to comment on that? And by the way, let me just end by saying, I don't think that you're fit for purpose as the Attorney General of this here country. I think you should seriously listen to this intervention this morning when you were through and make a decision whether you want to stay in the position.
Thank you, Citizen Rollo. Mr. Ramdhani?
Well, I think I have addressed the salient part of that comment, that contribution, if I may call it that, earlier in terms of what the police powers are being proposed, what currently exists in Grenada, and how we will look at that in terms of making recommendations on that section. So I have addressed the salient part on that. I will not say anything else about anything else that the caller has said. I think, well, one thing, I think sensible people will want to prepare for eventualities that may come before them. And if you get up in the morning and you see the rain clouds, you don't wait until the rain starts to fall to run back home and get an umbrella. A sensible person will pick up an umbrella and go out to his work. We are with a cloud over this world right now. That cloud is called COVID-19. And I don't know if you want to go out without the umbrella of protection that these regulations currently give you, and what is what is being proposed in the bill, what form or structure it takes at the end of it. What is being considered is to give you a raincoat, is to give you an umbrella, because we have a cloud that is likely to burst and rain down COVID-19. Well, it's raining down on some parts of the world right now. I God forbid that we have a single case coming to Grenada. I live here. We all live here. We wouldn't want that to happen. But what is being done right now is about seeking to find the right fit, the right fit to protect all of us. The conversation needs to be focusing on that. That's what the conversation needs to be focusing about. We need to have the ability to look at the issues and separate the attacks on personality. We need to have that ability. We need to be able to look at the document and decide what sections you have a problem with, why you have a problem. Say that to us. Tell us that. Yes? This is how we can have sensible conversation on the way forward.
In relation to the consultations, in the government's news release, it noted that it compiled this bill following 4 months of observations. Why during those 4 months were consultations not had with members of the public, and specifically the Grenada Bar Association, which has said that they were not consulted in drafting this bill as well? Why, to me, is putting the cart before the horse.
Let me say this, that when we started, it was not at all appropriate in March to engage in a process of consultation. We had to take action right away. The government made a decision, not the Attorney General's office. The government made a decision. And that decision was made in extremely critical circumstances. Throughout that time, we started with a lockdown, a 24 hours lockdown. We were paying attention to lives and health. We were looking to save lives during this last 4 months. In the first 2 months, things were extremely critical. We had cases still in this country. Our government had to take drastic action. That is what a state of emergency is about. You elect your officials and you give them power to run a country. And you put them there to make decisions and to make decisions that are necessary. They have to have the ability to decide when consultation is appropriate. Sometimes they get that wrong. Yes, sometimes they get that wrong. But they have to be the ones, because if they had gone to consultations in March, somebody may have said to them, many persons may have said to them, why are you consulting on this? And people are falling around us. People are catching the virus around us. You should have declared a state of emergency. Every Caribbean country declared a state of emergency. What that meant was that no Caribbean country consulted on it. But consultation began immediately after that. Not this formal consultation that we are proposing now. Consultation takes many forms. Consultation is about listening, is about getting feedback. It is about responding to feedback. It's about being open-minded to what the public is saying. Members of the bar, the public community, public health community, the law enforcement community, members of the public were writing, speaking. Facebook was lighting up from time to time. Social media was lighting up throughout this 4-month period. Long articles, full-page articles were written in the newspaper, criticizing this aspect, criticizing that aspect. Why do you think your government continuously changed the regulations? Why? They were listening to the public. They took away 24 hours lockdown and they went to 8 hours. They took away 8 hours, I think they went to 6 hours when the curfew went to 10 o'clock. Then the curfew changed completely because they were being responsive to the public. They were answering, they were reacting in a manner that was taking on board the statements that are going to be made. Plus, when we go to this consultation, or when we meet face to face with everyone who wants to contribute to the discussions in consultation, they are going to be telling me something. They're going to be telling their elected officials something. They're going to be telling the government something. And they have been doing that through the 4 months. I think this is one of the reasons the government, we may have blinked on this issue of the formal consultation process. Because last month, this month, when the last set of regulations were passed, it was not done or passed with any formal consultation process, even though it was responding to the changing needs of relating to protecting the society. It was reacting and responding to that changing need. So we saw that we could receive flights. A decision was made in relation to that, so that people can return to some level of livelihood. Busmen, taxi drivers were not being allowed to work in the earlier days. People are not getting any money coming into their homes. All shops were closed. And so this economy had to kickstart. We had, on the one hand, people are saying, why did you cancel Carnival? Some persons are saying that, and some people recognize that, yes, you should do that. But if we don't cancel Carnival, then how do you criticize the government trying to put food on some people's table? How do you criticize that decision? And so you must be able to recognize on this process of consultation, we have been receiving feedback. And I think people have misconstrued what I have said earlier, because I have said that we were receiving feedback and that was in a sense a process of consultation. They may have taken it, I think that we don't need any. No, we do need it. We do need it. I agree, we do need it. Yes, we have the ability to listen, have an open mind, and to change views that you may have once held. Today, in relation to two of the problematic sections, I have expressed a view which is an evolved view, that I am prepared to make recommendations. When we won't do them today, tomorrow. When we are in the process of consultation, I sit with the bar, I sit with other stakeholders. The minister will also be sitting in those discussions, because this is not a process driven by the Attorney General. This is a process that is driven by the government. Yes, I am participating in this process.
Mr. AJ, unfortunately, we'll have to end the program here.
You're sure?
Yeah.
Because there's so much more I think people want to speak about,
which is why I was going to say, this conversation will continue most definitely. The government always has a spot here on the program every Wednesday, so we can make arrangements to see that you return next week. Please allow to continue the conversation, because there's so much that we have not covered, so many callers and social media posters and questions that we need to get to. So I would invite you back as soon as possible so we can continue this conversation.
Thank you, Blossom. I would like to say that I'm grateful for all of the comments that were constructive. That brought meaning to this conversation, that we all have an obligation to play. We need to avoid the on others because we are upset with something. You have elected officials, and these officials are guiding your policy directions in this country. Yes, understand that clearly. That's where policy comes from. They are your policy makers, and I know they're listening to you. The government convened a special meeting of cabinet on Sunday because of this. I didn't convene that. The government did. And so the government is listening to you. I do hope I have the ability. I'm trying to have the ability that God will keep me and keep me to address the issues and not to get drawn in to decide things. I don't wish to do that. And so, Blossom, I thank you very much for having me here. Thank you for attempting to make this a very easy atmosphere to continue this conversation.
Most definitely. Thank you again for your time. Have yourself a good day. Stay safe.
Yes, you too. Thank you.
That was Attorney General Darshan Ramdhani, our guest this morning. Before I sign out, just a note to our viewers and listeners. If you are calling and when you are participating in the program, I would implore upon you to be respectful of our guests. I do not care your personal feelings, what you think of that person. That's not my concern. If you're calling the program, please be respectful. I have tolerated it today because I did not send out this stern warning, but take note, going forward, any caller that is disrespectful to the guest, to me, to the viewers, to the listeners, you will be cut off unceremoniously. No pomp and pageantry, just plops, no thank you, no nothing. Because I think it is ridiculous, to say the least, to call and tell the man go back where he comes from. I mean, that was uncalled for, and that was far from the discussion. So I would implore once again that you be respectful when calling the program, please, and thank you. As we sign out, we are getting ready to join a Parliament sitting, which started at 9. It is already in progress, and we are going to join that sitting here on Classic, as well as there are people that are leading a protest in front of the Parliament building this morning in relation to the same bill that we discussed this morning. And you can catch the protest action on the GBN Television Facebook page for those of you who want to see the placards and who's participating and so on and so forth. If you want to participate in the protest yourself, feel free to do so. That's the end of my time today. I'll be back with you tomorrow, God willing. Have yourselves a productive Wednesday, and let's get ready to now join the Parliament sitting, which is in progress. Have a good one, everybody.